بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing on our lessons on Usul Fiqh. Last week we were discussing the evidences, al-adillatu al-muttafaqu alayha, evidences which the ulama have agreed upon. And we mentioned that there are four: Quran, Sunnah, wal-ijma' wal-qiyas. Quran, Sunnah, consensus and analogy. And we explained that each one of these, for the vast majority of the scholars, except for very few, they agree to these four as being evidence. And underneath each one of them, there's a discussion as to how can you use, or what degree do we use, for example, the Sunnah. But that doesn't mean the Sunnah is not Hujjah. The Hujjah to Sunnah, the validity of the Sunnah is there. The differences would be then in authenticity of Hadith, for example, the meaning of the Hadith, its implications, etc. Another example, Qiyas. The vast majority of ulama say analogy is evidence. But where the difference will come in impacting actual fiqh will be is application of analysis or analogy in this place or that place. Or the illah, the reason for a ruling, is it applicable or not? So the benefit we take by knowing which evidences are agreed upon, which are different over, is that the ones which are agreed upon, if someone were to cite you as evidence, or a shaykh or alim made a ruling based on them, then we can readily accept that, provided that certain conditions and other things are met. Right now in our discussion of Usul Fiqh, we started off by talking about what are the ahkam, the rulings that we need, which are 5: obligatory, wajib, mustahab, recommended or mandub, mubah, permissible, makruh, disliked, and haram or mahdhur, prohibited. These are the 5 rulings we derive and we're going to mention whenever we want to give a ruling. Then we talked about the people who the ruling applies to, ahlul taklif and the mukallaf, and all these rulings relating to him. And then we now are talking about the evidences by which rulings are going to be established. From the Quran, you can learn something's wajib. From the Quran, you can learn something is mustahab or makruh or haram. From the Sunnah, from a consensus, etc. So the evidences that are remaining for today's discussion are the ones which the ulama differed over. And this is today's discussion. The evidences which the scholars differed over. Al-adillatu al-mukhtalafu fiha. Al-adillatu al-mukhtalafu fiha. The evidences the ulama differed over. Evidences which the scholars, they differed over. So al-mukhtalafu fiha means some scholars accepted these, others didn't. Or they accepted it in certain conditions, or they didn't accept some of them and accepted others. So for example, as we'll see, some of them they took it, some they said no, some said yes, some said this way. So these evidences, if someone or alim, a scholar, based or developed a ruling based on one of these different over evidences, you may notice that many of the scholars may not agree to the evidence, hence they might not even take the ruling to begin with. Or they may establish the same ruling using a different evidence. So the benefit behind knowing this, a lot of difference of opinion can return onto the nature of the evidence you're using. The nature of the evidence you're using. So what are these? Right, if we look back at the chart we shared a couple weeks ago, we mentioned here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, although there are more, but we'll go over them one by one. The first one is the opinion of a companion. This is the first evidence in which the scholars, they differed whether or not you can use it to develop or establish a ruling. Madhab al-sahabi or qawl al-sahabi, they call it. Madhab al-sahabi, what does it mean? When we say sahabi, or from ashab Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's talking about a person, or ashabi, right? So who is this? Who is this person? Is a person who met Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or have accompanied him, believing in him, right? So accompanying Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam while being a believer in him, and then dying upon that, right? Upon that Islam. So the scholars sometimes use the word whoever met the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or man sahib al-Nabiy sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever accompanied him, mu'minan bihi, believing in him. And then some of the scholars say, how much do we need to know about this? If he believed in him and he accompanied him, then this will go back to, right, what the scholars say that generally speaking, will suffice as a companion. Because some of the ulama say it goes back to long duration, short duration. Inshallah, it all counts. Still sahabi, it doesn't matter. وَمَاتَ عَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ, and they died upon Islam. So the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, definitely their statements have weight. But how do we know if the statement of a companion can be taken as evidence or not? This is the question. For example, if a Sahabi says something is halal or haram or recommended or not, is it dalil? That's a good question. Some of the fuqaha, they base their principles, right? One of their usul is this. Another group of fuqaha, they don't take it that way, or they might have conditions. So to understand this, the way you divide this topic, you divide into four categories. And the idea behind it is that a companion, if he said something, or he believed something, or he propagated something of an opinion, generally speaking, it can be used as evidence, but there are categories. Category number one. The Sahabi, he said something in a matter which there is no opinion. It's a matter of worship. So imagine like a Sahabi, he said something about something of ibadah. There is no opinion in ibadah, right? Ibadah is all tawqifiyya. It comes to the Quran and Sunnah. Sahaba have to take it from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the Quran. So if a Sahabi holds an opinion or he's propagated an opinion in which the matter he's talking about is worship related, there's no room for opinions, then it's considered hujjah, it's considered evidence. In fact, it's more than just hujjah. It can be considered like a hadith. له حكم رفع. It's as if it's a hadith. Why? The scholars say because the Sahaba, they don't talk about these matters of deen except with evidence from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the Quran. And the ulama, the four madhabs, they agree to this. So a Sahabi, he spoke about something regarding worship or at-taqdirat, determinations about like either numbers or punishments or things like this. So something which there's no room for ijtihad, there's no opinion here. This is report. But he never said Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said it, he just said it himself. So an example, the Sahaba, when it comes to Hajj, the Sahaba, they talked about the rulings of hunting and Hajj. So they made the rulings, the Sahaba generally, that whoever kills a particular animal, in this case na'am, like an ostrich or the likes of that kind of bird, then the person will have to sacrifice a camel in its place. So some may say, where did the Sahaba get this from? This analogy between an ostrich and a camel. So if you're in a state of ihram and you went to hunting, which is not allowed, and you killed an ostrich or animal of that size or the likes of that, the punishment, according to the Sahaba, the penalty, you have to sacrifice a camel. And we studied this in Umdat al-Fiqh. Question, where did the Sahaba get it from? So they didn't say Rasul said it. Where did they get it then? Clearly from him, because you can't make up things like this. This is ibadah, this is taqdeer, they're giving you estimation how much you have to pay. So whenever there's no opinion in this, no ijtihad, where did they get it from? Rasulullah. So it's as if Rasulullah taught them that, because that's what it is. So that's the first category. Whenever the Sahaba give an opinion on a matter, there's no room for personal judgment. It's something that either they took from Rasul directly, alayhi salatu wasalam, or something that occurred in his time period, but they passed it on. But they didn't say Rasulullah did it. And this applies to fiqh and aqidah, both. So in aqidah, the same thing. The Sahaba, for example, tells us about the malaika something. The sanad is sahih. What's the ruling on that statement of the Sahabi? Bab al-aqidah, there's no ra'i here. It's going to be accepted. It's going to be hukm marfu'. It's i'tiqad. We believe it. And that's very important to know. When the companions talk in these matters, forget about being a proof. We say it's a hadith. Lahu hukm rafa'. The Sahaba took it from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then now let's look at category 2. Let's look on a different view now. A companion said something, and this opinion that they said is widespread amongst the scholars, and nobody amongst the Sahaba differed with them or opposed them in that opinion. So imagine that there's a statement, let's say Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu said something, and none of the Sahaba who is in the vicinity or those who reached him from other vicinities, from Mecca or Medina, wherever, no one opposed him. وَلَمْ يُخَالِفُهُ غَيْرُهُ. No one opposed him in it. Then that means that this statement is also hujjah. You can use it as proof. Why? Because when the Sahabi said something, and everyone knows he said it, and no one opposed it, what happened here? Ijma', consensus, sakuti, a silent consensus. So that's another example of hujjah. So this is the most common application. The most common application of the statement of Sahabi is this one. قول الصحابي الذي اشتهر ولم يخالف فيه غيره فيه. Any statement of a companion or opinion of a companion in which it became widespread amongst the companions and nobody opposed him in it, then it becomes a hujjah because it's actually a consensus. Because with Sahaba, could they keep quiet about opinions when they make a mistake? No. If someone made a mistake, they would correct each other. Right? So there's many examples. Aisha correcting another Sahabi, or one Sahabi correcting another Sahabi. So in the statements, when we don't have anyone correcting them, it means the silent consensus happened. Hujjah. That's a hujjah. So that's a very common example of one. So it's very important then when we do fiqh, we look to what the Sahaba said. Because we want to know, did they have a certain opinion? The third category, a companion has a statement or belief in which others amongst the Sahaba differed with him. So he has an opinion, another Sahabi has another opinion, so they differed. فَلَيْسَ بِحُجَّةٍ. This is not evidence. Why? Because the fact that they differed means it's a majority ijtihad. It's a place for ijtihad, scholarly efforts to be made. So for example, many issues we have Ibn Umar here, Ibn Abbas on that side. Two of them are different. If I say Ibn Umar said this, and I tell you Ibn Abbas said that, both of them are not going to be hujjah here. What's going to be the hujjah? قال الله وقال رسول. Whose opinion closer to the evidence? Why? Because we can't say it's a consensus here. They differed. But you can use it as supplementary evidence. So let's give an example. I have ayah, I have a hadith. I believe the interpretation is on this side, and my supplementary evidence is that Ibn Abbas also said the same thing. Okay, that's good. But you're not going to tell me, khalas, akhi, there's no other difference. No. I can take a different opinion because another Sahabi differed. And often you find that if there's more than one statement of Sahaba on a topic, then that means difference of opinion. So a person can go to what they believe is stronger to the evidence. It's not a must that they have to stick to that opinion. Because it's a statement of one companion, not the statement of all of them. The second category, all of them didn't say anything. So it becomes very strong evidence. It's a consensus. So madhab al-salaf is different than qawl al-salaf. Madhab al-salaf is different than madhab al-sahabi. Because if the Sahaba said something collectively, that's fahm salaf. If one of them said something, it can be a fahm salaf, but it could also be not, because they differed. It could be one of the opinions of salaf. Sometimes you'll mix them up. Once someone said something, they say that's the qawl of salaf. That's one of those qawl, there's another qawl. But if they all said something, or they mostly said something, or they agreed to something, then that's madhab salaf. So very important that we be careful with this, because sometimes people are going to take one opinion and say, Akhi, you have to follow Sahaba. You have to look, you can't just take one opinion. The fourth category then, the companion had said something in a matter in which it's open for ijtihad, there is a difference of opinion, or someone's making ijtihad, juristic effort to reach a conclusion. And this opinion of the companion is not widespread. And maybe none of the Sahaba really knew about it, or they didn't accept his statement, then this is also not hujjah. So a statement of a companion in something ijtihadi, something open for effort or ijtihad, and it didn't become widespread, and other Sahaba didn't either oppose it or they didn't know about it. In that case, it's a difference of opinion. Means we know the statement of Sahabi, generally speaking, should be accepted. But why don't we accept this necessarily? Why the scholars differed? It's a statement of a companion. It's widespread, but we don't know if everyone accepted it. We're just not sure. So here, what we're going to do, some scholars take it as proof, some say it's not a proof. Because it's possible someone else differed and we don't know. So the best thing to do here is that you have to investigate. I'll give you an example now. Right? Most of the scholars, right, they say that you can use a statement of a Sahabi like this as evidence. But if some of them say that, it's not necessarily definitive, right? You can still look to see more because we're not sure if anyone differed with them. So at the end of the day, it is a type of proof, right? But it's not as strong as the other two. So if you want to summarize, because the Sahabi said something and it became widespread and no one is known to differ with them, it's not category 2 because it's not a consensus. Then it is evidence, but not as strong as the other two, the first two categories. So in summary, we have 4 categories. The first category, Sahabi said something in which in a topic where there's no ijtihad possible. What's the ruling on that? It's evidence. It's actually a hadith even. Hukm rafa', it's like as if it's a hadith. Category 2, a Sahabi said something, it became widespread amongst the Sahaba, and none of them differed over him or with him in that matter. That's a silent consensus, it's evidence. Category 3, a Sahabi said something, others differed with him, that is not evidence, because Sahaba differed. Fourth category, a Sahabi said something or had an opinion, it became widespread, but we don't know if they differed. The most correct opinion, it still is evidence, but not as strong as the first two. So why do we need to pay attention to all of this? Some of the discussions of fiqh go back to this. And who's amongst the ulama who often uses statements of Sahaba? Imam Ahmad. Imam Ahmad in his madhab, the Hanabila, they use a lot of qawl Sahaba. Sahaba as evidence. So you have to know that sometimes they may resort to it. So depending on what your view is or what your opinion is, you may or may not align with their viewpoint. Should we give it some examples? We should give example, right? So we can see this. Because at the end of the day, without that, we won't be able to better appreciate this. Now before going there's one more discussion, one more. And then we'll give it an example. One more discussion under this heading. If a Sahabi said something, or held an opinion, and it opposes qiyas, is it proof or not? Right, that's a good question. Jazakallah khair. A Sahabi has said something, and it opposed an analogy that some of the scholars might have derived. So the scholars, they say here, in order for the statement of a Sahabi to be taken, it should not oppose qiyas, analogy, a valid analogy. Why? Because if it's an opinion of a companion versus an analogy based in the Quran and Sunnah are the absolute evidences, and qiyas is the fourth of the agreed upon. So they say then, for the qawl of Sahaba, to take a statement of Sahabi, it must not oppose the qiyas, because qiyas is established on stronger grounds. Why? Because where do you get the qiyas from again? Where do you get analogy from? The Quran and Sunnah. Where is the qawl of Sahabi coming from? Either his opinion or his ijtihad, possibly. So there can be a little bit of the issue there. So some of the scholars they suspend judgment on that, because they say that it's not possible for a Sahabi to oppose the qiyas, right, with his own ijtihad or potential ijtihad. But often you will find that the qawl of Sahabi won't oppose the qiyas. Why? Because Sahaba, they know qiyas, they know analogy, right? So they're not going to make a statement that goes against analogy. They may use, right, an opinion that goes in line with analogy. Let us give one example to show how this can impact fiqh. All right, let's give an example. The hukum sujood tilawa. Mas'ala, the issue of sujood tilawa. The sujood you make when you hear certain parts of the Quran. So what is the ruling on this? Right? Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and Ahmed, they all say it's a sunnah. Right? It's a sunnah. And it's not wajib. Okay? They all say sunnah. Abu Hanifa and his companions, they said it's wajib. When you hear ayah and sujood tilawa, you have to make sujood. Now, Jumhur are saying it's not, the majority. And what is their proof? When you go to the evidence, you'll see the majority of the companions, the madhabs, they use the qissa and the incident of Umar ibn Khattab, Fil Bukhari, wal Muwatta Malik, and others. Umar was given the khutbah one day, and he read an ayah that has tilawa, or has sujood tilawa, فَنَزَلَ وَسَجَدَ. He came off the minbar, he made sujood, وَسَجَدَ النَّاسِ مَعَهُ. Everyone made sujood with him. Next week he read another ayah on the minbar that had a sujood, and he didn't do it. And the people didn't do it. And he told them that this sujood itself is something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not obligate upon us. So whoever makes sujood, then is good. Whoever didn't, then that's also fine. So this narration is authentic. Here, what did they use? Qawlu Sahabi. And what category is it? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Look at your categories. Which category is it? Umar, in front of all the Sahaba, he did that. Category? 1, 2. Right? Is this something for ibadah? It's 1 and 2 in many ways. 1 because he's talking about ibadah, and 2 because the Sahaba agreed. They didn't differ. So it's both. And therefore it's hujjah. Why? Because if it was something wrong, someone would have got up and said, we have to do sujood. And they never did. So that's where we get the ruling that sujood tilawah is not wajib. You're relying on qawl sahabi. But the Hanafis may come and say, I don't take that as a dalil necessarily. You see, you have to know where you're even working with. Some may ask, where's the ayah in Quran and Hadith? You say, I don't have one. So you're already in bad grounds, because you look like you're just making up things. So what are you going to tell them? Madhab sahabi, qawl sahih, it's established. Sahaba don't. Umar ibn Khattab especially, who Ibn Mas'ud said when Umar died, 9/10 of knowledge he took with him to the grave. Right? Umar is that knowledgeable. Amir al-Mu'minin Umar is alim, right? We can't measure how much knowledge he had. So if he's doing something in front of the Sahaba, they're making iqrar, khalas. We don't need to hear anything else. So if we use this in some ibadat, it's absolutely correct. But when there's difference of opinion, which is stronger than this one, now you know why. So we can go to another issue where there's more of a bigger difference. Then you will go into a deeper discussion. Because this one is easy, 3 out of 4 madhabs. It's kind of easy, right? You go, okay, majority. But what about issues where it's a little bit more complicated? Right? So for example, for homework, you can research the fiqh issue of praying Salatul Jum'ah when Jum'ah and Eid coincide. You go home, you can research that issue. Salatul Jum'ah, right, for the one who prayed Eid. Eid and Jum'ah on the same day. We pray Eid and Jum'ah after. Eid, what is the ruling on the Eid at the Jum'ah coming after? Do we have to or do we not? It's connected to the Qawl al-Sahabi. You can research it and you can see whose opinion is what, where did you get it from, and you're going to see it's based on this. So that helps us to understand that some of these issues, if you understand the importance of it, all you're going to do, you're going to hold the opinion you hold, and you're going to see, well, according to the categories I have, I can take this as proof, I may not take in this issue. And that's what the ulama do. So whoever doesn't accept it, with conditions, whoever accepts it, with conditions like this. Let's move on to the next one now. The second evidence which the scholars they talk about, which is different over, shar'u man qablana. And so we translate that as the legislation of the people who came before us. What this means, in the Quran and Sunnah, Allah He talks about some of the previous shari'ahs, legislations, for the people, the before us. And so Allah tells us about it, either from Bani Israel or others. And when Allah tells us about the Sharia, what is the ruling on us acting on that Sharia? Where the discussion is, we're not supposed to act upon the Sharia before us, because Allah gave every ummah their own Sharia. But where the discussion is coming, it's in the Quran. Right? So Allah is talking about Sulaymaan, Musa, Harun, they did something, Dawood. It's in our book, but it was in their Sharia. Can I act upon it, or is it abrogated? That's the conversation. And the reason why it's important is because if you don't have a clarity on it, you may either take everything that's mentioned, or take some of it and others, or none of it. So to best understand this, the ulama they divide it into 3 categories. 3 categories. And this is very useful, because without this you may end up in serious problems, as you find some people who are Quranis, as they claim, they read the Quran, no one read the Quran before. Right? So that's the problem, because they don't know Usul of Fiqh besides anything else. So they read the Quran like that. Allah said, and you think, where are you going with it? That's what we have to ask. Where are you going to take us? First category, that which Allah has cited or quoted, subhanahu wa ta'ala, about others. And likewise, the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam or Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam quoted about the Sharia before us. So either Allah or His Messenger alayhi wasallam reported about this. So they reported something about a previous legislation. And our legislation has nullified that. Our legislation has nullified it. So there's something that happened before us, and that legislation is permissible. But in our legislation, there's a hadith or ayah that says haram. The correct opinion, there's no khilaf, this is not a hujjah. You're not allowed to act upon that. Is it clear? That one you can't, because the Quran and Sunnah said this is haram now, or abrogated, or no longer allowed. And so this is a good example where we cannot take the people legislation before us, because Allah gave us our own legislation. Because if we did, we're going to end up in, right, a problem. Because we know our Sharia is the final one, and it's the culmination of all the ones before us. So Allah tells us every ummah before us, they have their own legislation. لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. Allah says in Surah Ma'idah, ayah 48, we've given every nation, to each we've given a prescribed law and manhaj, methodology, which means legislation. So we always have to remember, every group before us, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً شَرِيعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا, and a law and a clear way. What's the difference between our religion, our legislation, and our deen of Islam, which is called Al-Islam al-Khas, the specific Islam, and the Islam of Adam and Musa and Harun? That's also Islam, right? Islam Am. They have Tawheed, we have Tawheed. Everything Aqidah we have, they have. Sharia, that's where we differ. So in the Usul, all the prophets are the same. For Sharia, they differed. لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. You have to know that, because some of the people, when they look at our deen, they may say, well, you guys come late. Islam comes late. We say, no, Islam has always been there. What, any prophet taught other than Tawheed? Any prophet didn't pray Salah? So what will be different is we pray, they pray. We pray 5 times a day, and most of us people pray how many times? Allah, 3 times, some scholars say, and some say, we know it's less because Isra Mi'raj, Musa said we pray less. So what do we take? They pray, we pray. They have Tawheed, we have Tawheed. Qiyamah. What's different? Sharia is different. So this will help us to know that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or His Rasul prohibited something for Sharia, we have to follow Sharia to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Nobody else's Sharia. Because every nation gets Shir'atan wa minhaja. So if you understand this point, imagine there's something in the Quran about the previous generation. They were allowed to do something we're not allowed to do. You can't say it's in the Quran. And this, like I said, the Quran is, in other words, when they read the Quran, they may read the Quran wrong. Saying it's in the Quran, so it's not haram. But tell them, if it's everything in the Quran has rules, you have to look at it properly. We're not going to differ in the Quran, we're going to differ in terms of whether that's a proper application of what's in the Quran. So an example would be Prophet Sulaymaan alayhi salam, and the fact that the jinn, they used to work for him, right? Surah Saba, ayah 13. يعملون له ما يشاء من محاريب وتماثيل وجفان كالجواب وقدور الراسيات يعمل آل داود شكرا وقليل من عباد الشكور. Here Allah says that we made for him, Sulaymaan, the jinn under his control. What did they used to do for him? They used to build for him elevated chambers, وتماثيل, and statues. Jama'ah, and statues. And that Sharia was allowed. So here Allah said tamathil وجفان كالجواب, and other things, bowls, reservoirs, and that was from the bounties Allah gave him. In our Sharia, is it permissible to build statues? Now, some might come and say, the Quran says allowed. Sulaymaan have it. What jawab? Some might tell you that. Right? You didn't hear that one before? Someone said, the Quran says you can have statues. Why? In the Quran, chapter 34, verse 13. And then we answer them with what? شَرْعُ مَنْ قَبْلَنَا. Jama'ah, we tell them that principle. And we tell them, Nabi Sallallahu when he came to Fath al-Makkah, what did he do? He kept the tamathil, right? No, he destroyed all of them, right? So if someone is going to use this, we're going to tell them, come on. But there are people like that. What's wrong with statues? This is the modernist today. He's going to come and say, what do you mean? It's all developed nations have statues. We're going to tell them, what can we do with such people, right? Except that we have to bring ilm. Yeah, it's easy to yell and shout. We got to answer. Be ilm. Because if you just scold them, it's not going to work. You have to make, wait a minute. You have a point, but it's shubha. You brought a shubha. Category 2. That which our Sharia has told us about or has been mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah. And that which has been mentioned, we find it in our Sharia. We find it likewise in our Sharia. So it's in the past Sharia, it's in our Sharia. It's in both. هذا لا خلاف أنه شرع لنا. There's no debate, this is our legislation likewise. So let's give an example. Fasting. Allah says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم. All you who believe, fasting has been prescribed upon you as it has been prescribed upon those before you. Surah Baqarah, ayah 183. We fasted, all nations before us, the prophets used to fast. Does that mean then fasting is part of legislation? Yes. The reason why Allah mentioned it is to confirm that legislation. So that one, no one differs. It's on our legislation, it's in theirs. The third one, that which has been reported to us, and there is no clear evidence in our Sharia that's abrogated. Here the scholars, they differ. It came from the previous generations. Allah mentions it. But there's nothing in the Quran and Sunnah to abrogate it. Is it proof for us or not? The correct opinion, huwa hujjah, it's evidence. Because Allah mentioned it. Allah mentioned it, and if Allah wanted to abrogate it, He would have. So that's why you find some of the ulama, when they do the tafsir, they take it from ayat, Bani Israel. You're wondering how is it taken? Because nothing, they abrogated that. So if it's from their Sharia, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't mention it, is abrogated, huwa hujjah. Why? Because it's in the Quran. It's in the Quran. So an example would be in a story of Surah Yusuf. When Yusuf alayhi salam told the people, right, when his brothers, they came to visit him and they lost a bowl, وَلِمَنْ جَاءَ بِهِ حِمْلُ بَعِيرٍ وَأَنَا بِهِ زَعِيمٌ. He said, whosoever is able to bring it forth, وَأَنَا بِهِ زَعِيمٌ, I'm going to compensate. So what is this proving? To chapter 12, verse 72. It has to do with al-ji'ala. Ji'ala in Islam is like a prize for an action you do. Ji'ala is a type of business transaction. Like when you say, whoever does this will get a prize. Right? So whoever does it gets it. This type of fiqh, right? It's allowed, right? And also it proves the idea of daman, right? Warranty. So if you look in fiqh, when you look at this chapter of Ji'ala, you look and say, okay, what's this ruling? And the ulama will say, Allah said, Yusuf said, and you may ask yourself, why Prophet Yusuf's story? Because this story is for Everybody. The Quran never abrogated that. So that's why the ulama pull from that, because it's not category 2. Category 2, the Quran prohibited something from theirs for our legislation. But this one, the Quran didn't prohibit it. Allah said it's in the Quran, so therefore we can use it as evidence. Because everything in the Quran and Sunnah is evidence. We also have to add something to this. Most of what's in the Quran and Sunnah is not abrogated. In fact, abrogation in our religion is very less. Very less. So very important to know that, because some people claim abrogation for everything. No, abrogation is very less, as we'll see later, very less. And the reason why we're allowed to act upon this, because someone may say, that's Prophet Yusuf's story. What about us? أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَى اللَّهِ فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدِي. These are people Allah guided, so take them as guidance, right? ثُمَّ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ أَنِ اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. Allah tells us, follow Ibrahim. He's the best role model. He's the one who followed Tawheed. So Allah tells us to follow the prophets in some areas. So what did we learn then? The summary, the Sharia of those before us is 3 categories. Number 1, something which our religion has abrogated or prohibited, but exists in the previous legislation. That is not evidence. Category 2, that which our Sharia has mentioned and the previous Sharia has mentioned, that is evidence. And category 3, that which our Sharia doesn't abrogate, but exists in the previous Sharia, it's also evidence. So that means, what's the benefit behind knowing this? The Quran is open for benefit. Because imagine, for every story of the Prophet, you can't take this, you can't take that. So what are we going to do with the stories of the Prophets? How can we derive rulings if everything's in the past? So for example, you go to chapter 28, Surah Qasas, and look at the story of Musa. And the ulama derive so many benefits. Ibn Arabi and Maliki says benefit. He talks about Meher. What was the Meher Musa paid? To the old man. What was it? How many years are you going to work for him? 8 to 10 years. It's the dalil. It's jais to do Meher like that. So many fawaid. Right? So they take from the story of Musa, because Musa mentioned most in the Quran. So we can take a lot of benefit from these stories. And that's one of the ways you can benefit from the stories of prophets. You benefit from the morals and the ahkam. Surah Kahf, for example, lots of ahkam in there, right? So this is useful, but also with the parameters, because without it, somebody may take a wrong positions, right? Without knowing the rules. Okay, we move to the third one. The third one is called Al-Istihsan. Juristic preference. And our chart is called juristic preference, Al-Istihsan. And what is meant by Al-Istihsan is when a scholar, he prefers one evidence over another. That's it. Al-Istihsan, it means to prefer. To prefer one evidence over another. Or to act on one over another. So scholars, when they looked at this, they said, what is Istihsan? There's 2 evidences on a topic. Both of them are available. And when looking at the difference of opinion, a sheikh might say, you know what? I take this evidence over that one. Why? He just made istihsan. He prefers this one. Now, is that proof? That's a good question. Is that a proof? That the choice of a scholar, is that a proof? So the ulama, they say that generally speaking, when there is istihsan, we need to look at it more carefully. Because Imam Shafi'i was amongst the most strongest in denying it. Because he said that it's not proof when a scholar chose one evidence or not. Man istahsana faqad shara', he used to say. Whoever prefers one proof or other, he's speaking of legislation, he's made ruling. So what is the benefit behind this? It's not easy to say that I prefer this evidence over the other. Why? How? So scholars say that istihsan, you can divide into 2 categories, and this will be the summary of it. 2 categories. Category 1, al-amal bil-ijtihad wa ghalib al-ra'i fi taqdir ma lam yuqaddir al-shari'. We can act upon the istihsan, the scholarly juristic preference, when it's an issue with his ijtihad and the sharia didn't give us exact numbers or details regarding. Example, nafaqah. How much should you pay your wife? A husband should give monthly or yearly to his spouse. We said before, this is a wajib ghayr muhaddad. It's a wajib that has no boundaries. Sharia didn't tell you. So Allah says it goes back to ma'ruf, right? Now, obviously, this could be abused by some people, right? Because Ashirul Ma'ruf, maybe he's a bakhil, yani. So he's urf, he's bukhala, right? He's with the stingy. So what can you do? Some ulama say, okay, in this kind of chapter, Shaykh Fulan, he inclined towards this number, we're going to go with that. Yeah, sometimes the ulama do this. Why? They might see as a value in that. It's ijtihadi, but it can be useful to prevent some harms. So that's one area you can act upon it. When there is an ijtihadi issue, and the Sharia didn't give us an actual determination of something, we may use scholarly preference to help us. And that's what shows us the adab that we always have with ulama. We always go back to them. Sometimes we take their opinions, sometimes we take their preferences, and that shows you how to Sunnah Jama'ah. We love the ulama. We never sideline them. Whenever. We just take their views depending on what the Quran and Sunnah and the ulama have laid down. So this is one area where you can do this. A second area, الدليل الذي يكون معارضا لقياس الظاهر. Right? So you can use this also when there is an evidence that you're working with that goes against clear-cut qiyas. In this case, if there's an evidence and there's another evidence which is qiyas, let's say there's two evidences on the table, and one of them is an analogy and one of them is an evidence that we're working with. You can rely upon a scholar's choice to use this evidence over analogy, for example. And this will also be similar to the earlier one. So at the end, by itself, al-istihsan is not evidence by itself. Rather, in certain areas, it can be. That's the summary, really. Because really, what we need is evidence. We need something clear-cut. And so really, when the ulama, when they talk about istihsan, for the most part, we're not going to rely upon it because that will be very weak, right? It's a really weak evidence, so it has to be used very sparingly. And some of the fuqaha, they use istihsan more. Right? So for example, I believe Imam Malik, rahimahullah, in his madhab, there's istihsan, right? And also, we said for Amr Ahl al-Medina, other things, more so. So Imam Shafi'i, as a student, he didn't agree to that. Because you need evidence to prefer evidence. Because therefore, it's going to be like going in a circle, right? طيب, the fourth one now, al-istishab. Al-istishab, it means connectivity. That's one way of translating it. Al-istishab. It's like saying something remains on its original ruling. That's really what it is. إثبات ما كان ثابتا. استدامة إثبات ما كان ثابت. In other words, something remains on its original ruling until otherwise proven. So what's going on here is that, imagine there's a particular issue we're discussing, and we don't have anything in the Quran or the Sunnah or consensus or analogy or anything to take that thing away from its original ruling. What do? We keep it in its original ruling. That's it. So the way it goes, whatever ruling it had, it stays in the ruling until otherwise proven. This is a useful benefit because if I make a claim, something's haram, the onus is it's on me to bring the proof. I can't bring the proof, what's the ruling? Whatever originally is. So let's give some examples how this can be used. Let's say, for example, somebody comes and says there's a 6 salah, wajib, right? You have to pray 6 salahs a day. So how are we going to respond to this person? We're going to say, where in the Quran and Sunnah is that? He's not going to bring one. So what's the origin? There's no such salah. Because of the ibadah, what's the origin of ibadah? Tawqifiyya. You can't make up stuff, evidence-based. So I'm sorry, there's no 6 salah. Another example. Someone may come and say, there's a general evidence, it's actually restricted. So what does that person have to do? He has to bring you proof for the restriction. Otherwise, the origin is general. Because most evidence in the Quran and Sunnah are general. So what do you learn from this chapter? First, you learn what is the origin of something, and you stick to that origin until otherwise proven. Right? So a good example would be in law or court. Someone's innocent until proven guilty. Al-istishab. Same thing, I'm innocent. And the same thing, I'm not mukallaf regarding something illa bidilil. Someone says you have to do something, where's the dalil? I don't have to otherwise. And that shows you again, the sharia is not dhulm. You can't just make wajib on someone something. You have to bring proof. Another example, someone may come and says that a particular text has been abrogated. Right? What's the origin? Things are not abrogated. We said it just a minute ago, right? So someone has to bring abrogation, otherwise it's not abrogated like this. So this is a useful principle, but the scholars, when they talk about it, they say that ultimately we can't keep relying on it though. We have to make sure there's no evidence. You got to be careful. So what is the condition to rely upon al-istishab? You have to have no evidence in the Quran, Sunnah, consensus, or analogy. There must not be any evidence whatsoever. Like no evidence to take it away from his ruling. But if there is an evidence, we have to go with the evidence. That's it. Another way some scholars they use it when there's a difference about something, when there's difference of opinion about something being halal or haram or wajib or sunnah, or something being valid or invalid, the origin they're going to say is that it still can be, you go to istishab, go to original ruling. Let's give it a scenario. A man made tayammum because there's no water around him. Then after he started his salah, right, perhaps water appeared after. So the scholars all agree a person who prayed salah with tayammum when there was no water present and he didn't know about it while he was praying, salah is valid. And this is because before he started, there was none. Now, someone may come and say, but some of the scholars say that if it appears when he's praying, he has to cut his salah. Right? He has to cut his salah. But we're saying somebody's praying and he's not aware of it, al-istishab. The origin is salah is valid, he can keep going. But if someone tells him there's water there, then it's different. Now he knows. So here we can see if someone told us all this different opinion, the validity of a person who prayed with tayammum, when the water was present, in this scenario you're going to say the origin is salah is valid because he did tahara. Illa bidalil. You need to bring dalil that his salah is invalid. Because in this scenario he prayed with the condition Allah told him. Right? So example would be, the scholars all agree he's allowed to start the salah when there's no water. But when the water was found, should he break the salah or not? So we're going to say that despite the difference of opinion, al-istishab, he's allowed to keep going because he started without water being present. You need to bring a proof, he has to stop praying. So they're going to bring the general proofs. We're going to say, well, the origin is salah counts. And stuff like this. So this was useful. What do you need to know about this issue? The connectivity or al-istishab, it's used by the ulama when there's no evidence, and the most, those who might rely upon it the most are the Zahiriyya. Just like they're the least to use the qiyas, if not at all. Why? Because the Zahiriyya, they debated qiyas and its validity, so in its place to use al-istishab. Sometimes erroneously, right? So sometimes they say this is halal, there's no dalil whatsoever. The problem is a qiyas, there's a qiyas. So sometimes you can see good application, sometimes you can see very wrong application that could lead to some serious issues. So hopefully it makes sense, because some of these issues, we'll see, everything we're discussing here, it only comes useful when you want to figure out what evidence is being used. If you don't know what evidence is being used, then you're not able to even engage in the conversation. That's why it's important to know about it. We'll finish very quickly with the last two, which is al-maslahatul mursala, public interest, or masalih al-mursala. Here, the ulama, they talk about public interest. What does that mean? The Sharia has come for our benefit. And some things the Sharia has clearly given its weight to the benefit, clarify what is the benefit. And other times it has negated a benefit. And other times it has opened the door to a benefit. So masalih are, what's the benefit for our dunya and deen? Sharia is about bringing benefit and deflecting harm. That's our deen, right? Bringing benefit, deflecting harm. So the ulama say, what is this masalih we're talking about? And masalih mursala means, in the Sharia, if something is beneficial, Allah already legislated it. If something has no benefit, Allah has prohibited it. Then there is something which can be beneficial, Allah never spoke about it. That's masalih mursala. Allah left it open to what? To the benefit that people might find in it in general. And therefore the ulama, when they talk about this, to make it clear, we're not supposed to look for the benefits by going against the Sharia, nor do we give benefit to something Sharia made haram. So first thing we have to be careful. Some people, when they look at this is connected with maqasid al-Sharia, this topic. And it's really lengthy, but we're going to make it very simple. Maqasid Sharia, this is one of the biggest debates today between the people of knowledge and the people of misguidance and desires. Right? There are many of them. Qardawi and his Khalifa and his Jama'ah. Right? This is what they're doing. Ilm for them, ilm maqasid, and the purpose of Sharia became like its own evidence and own world that it can be going against Quran and Sunnah. So it's very important to understand what's happening. An example would be, the Sharia has made haram something, zina, wal khamar. So Allah has negated the benefit in those things. Right? وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. Allah mentioned nafa', but He says ithm is more. Smulgha is denied, cancelled. Someone may come today and say, but there's some benefit there. We're going to say, where's the benefit? And He might bring you some weak benefit in face of the harm. So the Sharia, what does it do? Is negated it. Whenever Allah negates it, means there's no need for us to ever go there. But of course, in necessities, that's something different. I'm talking about in general. Today, someone may come and say, well, we need to reopen that door, investigate. Maybe there is some masalih. And if there's masalih, the deen came for jalb masalih. So why not? And this is what's happening today. Something haram is becoming halal based on the maqasid and its masalih. So the question which we ask, what's the benefit of the Sharia if it can always be overturned? And this is why for this topic it requires deep study and the importance of it, because today this is what's happening in the West and the East. People are coming with that's called the spirit of the law against the letter of the law. The same thing that corrupted Bani Israel and the Yahud and Nasara, all of them, especially the Yahud and Nasara. Nasara more so. The Nasara, what did the Christians do? They follow the spirit of the law. Right? Whatever Jesus, his general idea. The letter, they don't even know the letter. Forget about practicing it. So for them, the ma'na versus the lafz. The Sharia has come with wording, lafz wal ma'na. So get you to understand this. If the Quran and Sunnah gave it benefit, you have to follow it. Quran and Sunnah says negated, something haram, no benefit, no benefit. There's no need to investigate it. Allahu al-alim, Allahu a'lam, wa antum la ta'lamun. But the last one, the Sharia didn't say anything about it. This is for our able to use. This is called masalih mursal. You're allowed to act upon it. There are conditions now, 3 of them. So just remember these 3 conditions. When can we resort to the benefits in something? Number 1, the masalih mursala, they are to do with things which there is real benefit in it, not imaginative benefit. So first of all, it cannot be about something which the Sharia has negated or already accepted. So it has to be in matters like, or adat, or issues which the Sharia has kept silent about. So that's the first one. Masalih mursala, when do you act upon them? When there is no Sharia on it, and there's nothing on it. So we're going to get to that. So the first one, there has to be real benefit, not imaginative benefit. That's the first one. There has to be real benefit. So some people imagine, for example, let's make the inheritance equal between men and women based on imaginative benefit. The Sharia has negated that. But they're going to come and say, there's equal benefit. No, there's no benefit. It's not there because Allah negated it. But they might be saying the benefit is targheeb al-kuffar fil Islam. Let's bring the kuffar to Islam by saying this is allowed. And you're not bringing them to Islam, you bring something else. Right? It's like, let's bring them to some other Islam. So the problem with that is, if it was benefit, Allah would have legislated it. So that's first one. That's a real benefit, not imaginative. Number 2, the supposed benefit we're looking for, right, cannot be opposed by an harm equivalent to it, right? Or cannot be opposed by something else. So if there's 2 benefits we're trying to establish here, then we always go with the more beneficial one. If it has benefit and there's a harm, then we leave it, because the harm and benefit, in the Sharia, harm is given preference over benefit. So this benefit we're trying to establish, it cannot oppose a benefit equivalent to it or greater than it. Because if there's 2 benefits, I want to bring a benefit, and there's a benefit the Sharia has already given us. What's the problem here? I am bringing a new benefit going against a greater benefit. In the Sharia, we have 2 benefits. Which one do you go with? The most beneficial. So if the Quran and Sunnah already gave us an answer, then I'm coming with a new answer. It has benefit, but there's one that's already beneficial. No, you don't need it. Likewise, if there's a harm and benefit, you can't do that either. And the last one, which is the most important condition, that this maslaha, this benefit, في الأحكام التي لا تتغير, لا تكون في أحكام التي لا تتغير. It cannot be in rulings or issues where the Sharia doesn't change. So it can be in the wajibat or the muharramat. So you cannot use benefit analysis to make haram something wajib, or halal something haram, or to change the corporal punishment, or to change legislated punishments, or legislated amounts. So let's give an example. The Sharia has told us about the obligation of salah. I can't say in today's time the maslahah is that people are lazy, they don't pray a lot, so let's make salah 3. No, it's not going to work there. It's khalas, it's closed. Another example, someone wants to make halal something haram. So many governments, for example, when they look at legalizing something, in our Sharia, if Allah made something haram, there's no legalization there. Right? Like we see today, cannabis or other things that are legalized, narcotics. What they're looking at the masalih, they're thinking about people already smoking. No. Sharia says no, stop it. Because no benefit. It's already fixed. So where do you apply masalih mursala? Scholars say in things which are adat, or things which the Sharia has given us an open area, means that there's a place where the Sharia hasn't legislated something specific, or hasn't told us about specific numbers or determinants, or hasn't made halal or haram, it left it open. So people then can do it for their benefit. Example, building bridges, hospitals, that's adat. For ibadat, for example, certain certain adat or certain ahkam, if it's based on urf, a custom before, and today our custom has changed, we can change that ruling for the masalih of the people. So an example, in the past, certain rules were based on the ahkam, urf of the people of the past. But our urf, our customs changed. Can we change the ruling? Yes, depending on the change in the customs, because that was based on the custom. An example would be the age of marriage nowadays. We can't negate, right? Marriage can be done whenever someone reaches puberty. But what's some better practice for today based on the urf of the people? Or what's more aslah lahum? Because today is different than the past. Or other rulings like this. But that doesn't mean that you're going to make something haram, the sharia makes halal. Just means what will be the preferable practice. So the masalih, then the ulama look at it and they try to determine if something has a benefit or not. It again requires a lot more factors, but this is an analysis of Ahlul Ilm. They do this. But there's nothing in the sharia that you can't do, for example, building bridges or to look at certain rulings. If you go on, an example would be Umar radiallahu anhu, in the time period that he had, where there was the issue of a lot of divorce. So we can go on, that's an issue you can study as a homework. Umar, why did he change one divorce to 3 at his time period? And then later on became standard. Why did it went now? We know sometimes Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah went back right after he went to jail for that fatwa. And that's why he died. But today is the standard fatwa. 1 is 1, right? And so at that time, Umar, he changed, right? If he pronounced 3 divorces at one time, it counts as, it's supposed to count as 1. That's the time of Rasulullah. But Umar's time, too much divorce. So what did he do? If he pronounced divorce 3 times, it counts as 3. You're out. You divorced your wife. Why? Because he wanted to make people stop this bad practice, bad urf that they had. So you can research it, why Umar changed it. And you can research, it's going to go back to these kinds of issues. What was the urf at that time? What was the maslahah of the people at that time? He's not changing the hukm of Allah. He's trying to bring a benefit at his time that is needed. Because after his time period, when things change, you go back to the original ruling. It makes sense, this issue. You can research it. That's why if you look carefully what Umar was doing, he was looking at the masalih in an area where there's maslahah allowed. Or for example, changing the hudud. You can change the hudud, but the ta'zir, a punishment which is discretionary, or a certain had being increased, is it possible? It's possible. For example, we know there's a punishment in Islam for someone who drinks intoxicants. But can it be increased by a ruler if you see that it's become widespread? Yes. If it's more deterrent for the people. So why is it important? What's this increase going on here? He's not increasing something by changing the sharia. He's looking at the maslahah. He's not erasing it. He's not saying no more punishment. He's saying we need to look at it carefully, see what's more beneficial to people, and the ulama will do the ijtihad. You see, this is where there's some area. But what's happening today is something with the sharia has negated. Someone's going to come and say the maslahah. No. This is out, right? This is out. And this topic someone will study later in more detail because it requires detailed study and more knowledge about this because we need to really understand how the people of innovation are misusing this. The last one we finish with this is blocking the means. Blocking the means to something. Saddu dara'i', it means something which is a means to something else, making a ruling which prevents this wasila, this means, from leading to harm. So something's halal, or something is makruh, but a ruling has been made that it's haram now. Why? In order to prevent it from leading to something worse. Here the scholars differ on its application and its use. But as an actual principle, it exists in our sharia. And there's many proofs for it. So to give us the categories, scholars they say in general, blocking the means to haram is from the sharia. That's the rule. We know this. But the question should be, when do we do this? Scenario number 1. Something has become a means to something that's haram definitively. So let's say there's something that's leading to something haram definitively. This is a wasila, means to something haram definitively, like drinking alcohol. Drinking alcohol leads to intoxication, which the sharia has prohibited. So therefore, anything, right, that leads to that will become haram. But the sharia has prohibited it because of this. So what is the reason why khamr is haram? Because it leads to definitive harm. Like people becoming intoxicated, and from there becomes a lot of harm. So the sharia has made it haram. And therefore anything that leads to it also becomes haram. Second example, zina. Zina has become haram in the sharia because it leads to the mixing of the ansab, the lineage of people, and the tainting of people's lineage and honor. So the sharia has prohibited it and everything that leads to it. So if you go back before, we said haram has 2 categories. Haram li dhatihi wa li ghayrihi. So this is an example. When you look to see why something's haram, for what reason. So once we establish something's haram, we block anything that gets to it. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا, Allah says. Don't come near zina, don't do zina. Why? Zina is haram and anything gets to it. Clear? Second example. Something which is a means to something permissible. In this case, the Sharia permits something like this, but only when it's used in haram, the Sharia prohibits it. So if the intent behind something halal is to get you to haram, then the ruling changes from halal to haram. So let's give an example. Marriage is halal. But someone getting married in order to make another man's previous wife halal for him, right? This is haram, right? You can't do that. You have to marry if let's say a man divorces her wife 3 times irrevocably. She has to marry another man willingly. They have to be intimacy willingly. They have to be married properly. To which then if he divorces her, she can go back to the other one. Not that the guy will come and do a marriage and after that say it's just a fake marriage, right? This is haram now. So someone will say, but halal is married. Yeah, but the wrong intention. So something permissible used for haram takes the ruling of haram. That shows you the dynamic nature of the Sharia. Because there's so many things halal, but people are going to do something with it, so the Sharia looks at the intention. Third category. Something which is a means to something halal, and someone uses it in something halal, which could lead to something haram. So there's something that may lead to haram, but it doesn't always lead to haram. But most cases, it leads to haram. What do we do here? We look at the harm. The harm is given preference. Because this thing leads to ghaliban, most cases, haram. So the Sharia, for example, right, prohibits these things. For example, cursing false deities. These false deities that the kuffar have, they're worthy of being cursed because they're false deities, the taghut. But why did the Sharia prohibit it? Out of fear that it will cause retaliation to people cursing our deen, our Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدَوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Surah An'am, Ayah 108. Do not curse those who are called upon besides Allah, lest they curse Allah out of animosity and without knowledge. This shows us that blocking the means is established in the Sharia. Like today, someone goes to public and swears at another God. What is that going to lead to? Someone's going to swear on Allah and your fault. You caused it. So the Sharia says, don't do that. Do give them da'wah. وَجَاهِدُهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادٍ كَبِيرٍ. Argue with them the Quran. Do the biggest jihad, da'wah. But today, this is what we're resorting to, right? This is what a name call. And so the Sharia says no. The last one, something which is permissible means. And it can lead or does lead to haram. But in the scenario that a person is in, it has also a benefit. It's greater than the harm. So what is given preference here? The benefit. Something which is a halal means it can lead to or often leads to haram, but in the context someone's in, the halal is greater than the haram, or the benefit's more than the harm. The Sharia allows it because the Sharia always looks to the greater benefit. Example, someone going to get married to a woman and he wants to do another, wants to see her. Seeing her is haram, right? It's haram to look at men or to look at your maharim, your female relatives, but a non-mahram woman, it's haram to look at her. And in this scenario, he's looking and it's going to lead to something haram. So looking is haram, but looking at the non-mahram woman is haram because it leads to fitna. But in this case, the maslaha is greater, which is him getting married. So Allah's Sharia says, yes, you can look at her because you getting married to her and know how she looks is greater than the fitna that may come. Because if you don't look at it and get married, you get in big trouble, right? So the Sharia doesn't look at that maslaha is the mafsada is too big, right? So here the Sharia allowed it. Another example, right, could be like something to do with right, like example, something like similar to that, something which is halal, but in the scenario it becomes halal. So the ulama said that blocking the means is something established in the Sharia, and the Sahaba used to practice it, fi tawheed, wal aqidah, wal fiqh. Okay, so the scenario I mentioned before, and this was the contemporary example, women and driving in Saudi Arabia. This was a scenario. The ruling before was not allowed, and then the scholars they changed the ruling based on the wada' now. The first Wili Amr, he's the one who's going to take the view. But in the past, what was the opinion about women driving? Was it haram in and of itself? No. They were looking at the mafasid. At that time period, there was two opinions. The Wili Amr took one, and in the second after time, they changed the second opinion amongst the opinions that were debated before. This will go back to two issues. One, looking at blocking the harms and the benefit. And number two, the ruling, choosing what he sees to be beneficial for his people, on two opinions that are available. But some people, when they look at the first opinion, they say, how come it was even haram? Well, they said to die. What do you think the prohibition was? When actually driving or what it leads to? But some people didn't know this. So that's why we have to explain this. Some people don't know this. So some people may just say, look at the ulama, just make haram everything. And that's another job. That's one of the mistakes. The awam or awam. We don't expect anything from them to know how the ulama reach the rulings. But if they don't understand, they're supposed to ask. But also we have to help in making it easier to understand. So that's a summary of the most common ones. There are others, but this is sufficient. So these are the adillah, the evidences. 4 agreed upon. We mentioned 6 which are differed over. Each one has rules and conditions. Maybe next week I'll put them all the summary of each one of them. The benefit behind this discussion, if you know what the ahkam are, now you know what the adillah are. The real discussion will be how do you derive a ruling from those adillah. That's really what the discussion is. Because everyone agrees the Quran is evidence, Sunnah is evidence, ijma' qiyas, or qawl al-sahabi with its conditions. The question would be the statement of this companion, or this ayah which you're using, in this mas'ala, this issue, is it properly applied to or not? Or, better question, I have an ayah, does it really say what something is wajib or is it just recommended? See, that's the conversation the ulama debating. Seldom will you find the ulama debating, okay, the mas'ala, the khilaf, or sabr ikhtilaf, the reason why they're differing is because one shaykh quoted ayah, another one didn't quote ayah. No, that's not the conversation. The ayah we all agree to. General, restricted. That's the conversation. Abrogated, non-abrogated. That's the conversation. Wajib, mustahab. That's the conversation. So next week we're going to look at what is really the biggest conversation. The dilalat or dalalat. What is the indication of these evidences? But one thing you benefit from this lesson, someone tells you a ruling. What's the first question you're going to ask them? What's your dalil? What are you asking now? I'm looking for the 4 agreed upon or the 6 that differ over. Bring one of those. If he says, my shaykh said, laysa bihujja, akhi. You see, we're going to walk, laysa bihujja. I don't need that. I ask you dalil. And this is what's happening today. Some of us were coming and say, Shaykh Fulan said, that's naqal fatwa. I'm asking you the dalil of shaykh. I didn't ask you the shaykh's opinion. Even us, we should be better tarbiyah than that. Someone tells you something, you could tell him Shaykh so-and-so said, if it's he doesn't know. But if you ask, what's the Shaykh's dalil? Then it's okay. He went from here, he went. That's also a mas'ul. That's actually a haqq that someone asks you, and you have a right to, the right to have to ask you that question. But if you don't know, you can just say, okay, let me look at it. But imagine today you want to tell someone something's halal or haram recommended. It's not sufficient for us to say, oh, so-and-so said. He's going to say Abu Hanifa said. And you're going to say Abu Uthaymin said. You know, or look bad. You say Abu Hanifa, he said Abu Hanifa, you say Abu Uthaymin. What is this? Abu Uthaymin will say like this? Abu Uthaymin in front of Abu Hanifa, see, you set up to lose right there. You're supposed to say, well, so Ahmed said. Bring in something he would understand. But what we do sometimes, mistakenly, we forgot the shuyukh. Not everyone knows our shuyukh, or they might not respect him the way we do. Be like the shuyukh. Qala Allah, qala Rasul, qala Sahaba. Because the shuyukh, they don't say qala Shaykhana. They might say that, but they're going to bring you a dalil. Because if someone didn't agree with you, it's not because of your opinion, because dalil you didn't bring. So that's why if someone said to you, what's your dalil? And he said, I don't have one. Or he says, I'm Ahl Medina. You can say, oh, that's not, you can't take that as the proof. I need more detail. You see the benefit? Sometimes some conversations you could already limit the argument. Because someone may tell you a dalil is not even a dalil. Or someone may misuse a dalil. Like for example, Shara' min qabl. And he said, Allah said, and he brings you ayah, and he misinterpreted it. What are you going to do? You're going to tell him, brother, you have to use it in this condition, and then inshallah the discussion is over. But we're going to see next week, inshallah ta'ala, the real discussion of fiqh is how did these evidences prove what they prove. So this is really important. It's much more useful in the discussions. But everything we did so far has implications on real fiqh. Inshallah we'll summarize, but that much, inshallah, for today. If anyone has any quick questions, we'll take inshallah. What was that? How do we know? So we have to investigate the statement of Sahabi spread amongst them or not. Means, do we find any one of them differ on it? So ijma' sukuti is absence of anyone opposing him. So authentically, let's say the Sahabi Abbas said something, and nobody we could find the Sahaba differed with him. We're going to say that no one differed. Ijma' sukuti. We're not looking for ijma' sarih. That's too hard. So we're going to look, anyone differed? So you go to the books of difference of opinion, and you might find, boom, a whole list. That's the tricky part. Sometimes you might think you found no one differed, and there's a bunch who did. So one of the great scholars who has a lot on that, Ibn Mundir, Kitab al-Awsat. If you go in there, every mas'ala is going to bring you all the opinions. This long group here, long group there. And so when you say no one differed, but look, the There's a long list. And sometimes you go to big books to figure out. But let's say I couldn't find. What do I do then? I can assume, based on the fourth category, that without knowing if anyone different, it's still a hujjah. So category 2 and 4 are the same, in that both of them are opinion of Sahabi. Category 2, we don't know anyone different because we couldn't find it. Category 3, we just don't know, we're not sure. So both are proof, but category 2 is really strong. So you look at absence, evidence in this case. Because had they said it, we would have found it. Alhamdulillah, Sharia is recorded, right? And when we also be careful, it has to be authentic. Because sometimes you find someone who different as weak, or someone who said something is weak. So the first step has to be check the authenticity of that statement to begin with. So sometimes you may find a Sahabi said 2 things on a topic. So now you have to really be careful. But generally that's how we find out. Wallahu a'lam. Yes. So the hudud in general, we don't change it because Allah gave it to us. But some of them we don't have. So the hudud are limited, what they are, and the ta'zirat, the discretionary punishment more. But they had Umar increased it, for example, Sahaba increased it, but they didn't negate it or decrease it. So the maslaha would be, can we increase the punishment as the deterrent? Because the deterrent was, the maslaha behind it, the had was to deter people. So wazi' shar'i is called a legislative deterrent. So Umar saw if we increase it, and even sometimes certain circumstances you could increase to prevent somebody from something. That can be done. But decreasing or erasing it, that's the problem. Or even you can't even abrogate it or suspend it. Like for example, the time of famine, Umar suspended it. The modernists today have come and said, look, Umar changed the Sharia. This is what they're going to do. They're going to come and say, Umar, for example, he made a moratorium, a suspension on the hudud during time of famine for cutting the hands of a thief because we were hungry and theft is rampant. So again, the masalih, because that's the benefit behind them for that duration. But then some of these modernists have come and said, see, you could just change the Sharia based on modern times. Umar, what was the maslahah? To preserve the people. What's the point of the hudud? To preserve life. في القصاص حياة يا أولي الألباب. In the punishment, our hayat. These people are going to come and ruin our hayat dunya wal akhirah. Right? See, so sometimes you ask them, what you're doing, you're corrupting our dunya and akhirah. Where Umar was trying to preserve the people. So that's why some of these issues are very interesting when you look at what was happening. So those are examples to research, to see, because we know the Sahaba, they don't break these rules. They're ulama, they are the fuqaha. So when they did something, why? That's what we're trying to find out. But what's happening today, when somebody may come and say, Umar was changing rules based on masalih. So we can do it too. And what do you look at his game plan? He wants to create Paris. That's what he wants. He wants our cities to become Paris. And we tell him, what happened? What does this have to do with Sharia? All his rules coincide, mashallah, to UN rules, human rights. Everything is coinciding perfectly. Well, how? So very important, be careful. If we don't study this, you'll find today what's happening. A lot of people are being misled by this. So inshallah later we'll talk about that. But that's one of the benefits we can look into. Yes, brother. Good. So the traffic tickets, speeding tickets, this will be masalih mursalat, public interest. Exactly, clear. Why? Because the Sharia didn't prohibit them, didn't legislate them, they left it to our benefit. The reason why we have it is to slow down traffic so we don't kill people and we don't have crashes. So scholars say, therefore, it is a legislative, no, it's an administrative law for the benefit of people, so you must follow it. But today what's happening, some people don't know this. They may say, well, what's the benefit? Just like, for example, Hajj, we know there's the ahkam and then there's the other things that they do, like the traffic control. Masalih, look at the benefit, right? So expanding, for example, the Hajj, some will say, why we keep expanding it? Masalih mursalah. We need more people to come for Hajj, so we need more room. And that's why this expansion of Tawaf, for example, another research looked at how the ulama debated about the idea of expanding the mataf. Yeah, the area would make Tawaf. Before it was restricted, it got bigger and bigger and moving these things around. So they discussed it. Why? For this benefit. So yeah, that's a good example of masalih mursalah, public benefit. طيب, the last one, yeah. There's no more stop sign at nighttime. You still shouldn't do it. That's when you break the laws when they're watching, brother. Right? You still have to, right? Even though, so there is a discussion though when the ulama talk about if it's dhulm, if the maslahah is not there, it's a dhulm. Then there's a conversation whether or not someone has to follow that administrative law. But we're not gonna go there. We'll leave that one alone, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanallah, bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.